Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CPCO's webinar on the TPA Moving Toward Possibilities. We are pleased that you have joined us for this interactive webinar session where we will be sharing ideas and strategies on how to make this managerial task of teacher performance appraisal into one which can inspire rich dialogue with teachers that positively impacts instructional practice and student achievement or well-being at your school. My name is Angela DePrima, and I am a principal working at the York Catholic District School Board on Board Leadership Development Strategy. This afternoon, I am joined by a team from York Catholic as well as Toronto Catholic District School Board as webinar facilitators. Marianne Fredriconi, Principal in the Human Resources Department at YCDSB, Paulette Bellerby, Human Resources Department at YCDSB, Darlene Clapman, Chief Information Officer, Scott Boland, 21st Century Learning Systems Specialist, Colleen Hayward, Principal with the Toronto Catholic District School Board. It's recommended during this presentation that your computer be hardwired, and should you have any difficulties with YouTube, we ask you to recopy the broadcast in your browser. You'll also see at the bottom of each screen the hashtag CPCOTPA. Please use the hashtag during the course of this webinar to post questions to the webinar facilitators or to share tips and ideas on making the teacher performance appraisal process more meaningful. During the course of the presentation, we will attempt to address some of your questions either through the webinar or through Twitter. By joining the conversation, you'll make the session more meaningful both for yourself and other participants. While planning for this webinar, we thought carefully about the connection of an administrator's managerial duty of doing the teacher performance appraisal and the leadership opportunity that could be created through the TPA, LTO, or NTIP evaluations. We're all aware of our legal obligation to document teacher performance appraisals as set out in the Education Act, but we also recognize that this managerial task could be so much more. It can, in essence, be a fundamental tool that administrators use to impact instructional practices taking place at our schools, practices which have a direct correlation to positively impact student achievement. When looking at the TPA process, we see it's directly connected to the Ontario Catholic Leadership Framework, especially in three specific areas: building relationships and developing people, improving the instructional program, and supporting cognitive resources. When thought of in these terms, it becomes easier for us as Catholic administrators to make the connection between the teacher evaluation to our faith and to honor the role that we play in influencing excellent teaching in our schools. There is much research that suggests that administrators play a significant role in student achievement, albeit through the influence they can exert over their staff or students. Recognizing the leadership opportunities that could be fostered through this version of the TPA process and the need to be explicit about how this fits in with the concept of school management, at the York Catholic District School Board, we developed a professional development workshop for newly appointed administrators through our Board Administrator Mentorship Program. It is this session that has formed the basis of the webinar, and we will be sharing with you today. There were three learning goals to this workshop. We covered the essential managerial duties and mandated timelines, forms to complete, and report submissions to Human Resources. We shared strategies to conducting an effective and meaningful TPA, one that answered questions like, how can I augment the learning culture of my school by effectively engaging teachers in their annual learning plan or teacher performance appraisal? We facilitated time and opportunity for administrators to discuss any questions, challenges, and successes that have been pertinent to their experiences in this process in the context of confidential mentoring session. The context was set through a prayer specifically chosen for this session. a prayer which focused on our ability to inspire and influence others, reinforcing the faith mandate in the document, Fulfilling the Promise, The Challenge of Leadership, a pastoral letter to the Catholic education community by the Assembly of Catholic Bishops of Ontario. We began with a minds-on reading on leadership is about enabling the full potential in others. Our Employee Relations Manager, Paulette, led the first part of the workshop. She dealt with the 3 evaluation processes throughout a teacher's professional career: LTO, NTIP, and TPA. For each stage, she detailed the necessary requirements, evaluation procedures and timelines, various program designs and highlights, sample forms and their location in our intranet, and other managerial duties. Marianne and I, an elementary and secondary principal working at the board, led the next part of the workshop, concentrating on strategies to conducting a meaningful TPA. We will share some of these strategies today, and we encourage you to use the hashtag CPCOTPA to contribute strategies that have worked for you, as well as contribute to our collective knowledge. The theme of leadership is about enabling the full potential in others was at the center as the newly appointed administrators were encouraged to incorporate some of the shared strategies into their mentee learning plans. We begin now with Paulette and Colleen from the Toronto Catholic District School Board, and of course, you, our participants.
Thanks, Angela. As she mentioned, the next focus on the next part of the webinar will be to share with you some of the highlights on each of the 3 teacher performance appraisal processes. These processes focus on different stages of the teacher's career and include LTO, new teacher, and experienced teacher. In the first slide here, I'm talking about when the LTO evaluations are done. An LTO is evaluated in their first long-term assignment or 4 months or more. And this aligns with the new requirements under Ontario Regulation 274-12. We suggested to principals that the appraisal should occur after the first 4 weeks of the assignment. And really that is for an opportunity for the LTO to get settled in their assignment and be comfortable with the process before the actual appraisal began. Additional appraisals certainly can be requested by either the LTO or the administrator, and when completed, the original would be sent to the Human Resources Department, where it would become part of the LTO's recruitment file. We then shared the actual template for occasional teacher evaluation. The template I'm showing you today is the template that was produced in collaboration by key education partners and was put out by the ministry as part of the Ontario regulation. On this screen you see the top part of the template where it shows you that the form focuses on 7 performance expectation statements which are derived from the Ontario College of Teachers Standards of Practice. The form is a very streamlined format with a check mark rating of development meeting or meets expectation, and there is an opportunity at the bottom of the form for additional comments on each of these rankings. This is what the bottom of the form looks like, and on the bottom half is the ability to identify the outcome of the appraisal and recommend areas for professional growth. It's then signed by both the principal and the LTO teacher, who's indicating that they are in receipt of the evaluation. It also provides an opportunity for them to add any additional comments they may wish to about the evaluation process. Now, when this evaluation template was put forward by the ministry, there was also another tool that was provided, and this tool provides possible observable indicators for each of the performance expectations that you would be evaluating around. It's not intended to be an exhaustive list or a mandatory list of observable indicators, but it is there as assistance to you as you're going through the evaluation process of maybe look-fors that will help you determine an evaluation on that area of the LTO form. I'll now turn it over to Colleen from Toronto Catholic for a principal's perspective on LTO evaluations. Colleen?
Oh, thank you, Paulette. I will be sharing my perspective as a new principal in the Toronto Catholic District School Board. I was appointed acting principal in September 2015, and previous to that was vice principal for 2 years. The LTO form looks a little different in the Toronto Catholic District School Board. We have a 4-point rating system on satisfactory, satisfactory, good, and excellent. The best advice I received, and now share with you, is to know and observe timelines, as was previously mentioned. In TCDSB, we must complete one evaluation if the LTO is under 5 months, and a second one if over 5 months. This is important so that teachers do not miss out on applying for permanent positions. For all teachers, including any LTO teachers, I like to send out an email, usually the first week of school, to advise them that they are on evaluation and how the process works. You may have a system that generates an automatic email, which my system does. However, I prefer to send a personal email as I outline the process for the teachers, and it sends the message that I'm investing the time in the process and in them. The email includes the information about setting dates and what to bring to the pre-observation meeting. I do like to set dates with teachers the first month of school for the year. I feel this is helpful if there's ever a change in administration, although of course the dates are not in stone, and ensures you have enough time to complete each evaluation. At the pre-observation meeting, I like to walk the teacher through what the evaluation form looks like and how they will be evaluated, the 8 competencies and the rating system. I emphasize the focus for the observation is to celebrate what they are doing well and figure out next steps together. I feel this helps me to support the LTO. Even though he or she doesn't have an annual learning plan, I can still support any personal growth goals. A question you may wish to consider and tweet a response at #CPCOTPA is, what strategies do you use to support and develop LTOs in your school? So I'm just going to look at some of the questions that are coming up on Twitter. And many of the questions right now are asking about how to get a copy of the form that you mentioned, Paulette, as well as if the presentation will be available to download and how can participants receive a copy. So I'll turn that back over to York Catholic, and perhaps you can answer those questions.
Sure. Certainly from the, with respect to the ministry template, this would be available on the ministry website. And but like you mentioned, the form can look different from school to school. So I would suggest it would be good to contact your Human Resources Department just to make sure that you're looking at the appropriate form.
Also, this presentation you'll be able to download it through CPCO, and we will post some information towards the end of the webinar on some additional resources that you might access.
So now I'm going to move into the next stage of the evaluation process for teachers, and this is focusing on new teachers to the school. As far as eligibility to participate in the new teacher induction program, and this was the program that was introduced by the ministry, if it's a new contract teacher in Ontario who's in their first contract position since becoming certified with the OCT, or if they're newly hired experienced teacher whose entire teaching experience has been outside of Ontario, they would also be eligible to participate in NTEP. Later on in the introduction of the program, beginning long-term occasional teachers were also added to the program if they were in their first LTO assignment of 97 or more consecutive days since becoming certified. And this was allow them the opportunity to benefit from all of the professional development aspects of the program in those early stages of their career, since some of them may be doing LTO assignments for several years before they actually become a permanent teacher. The one thing to note with participation of beginning long-term occasional teachers is they are eligible to participate in all aspects of the program, except they do not get evaluated under the NTIP evaluation process. Instead, they would still be evaluated under the LTO evaluation process that I just went through on the earlier slides. As far as appraisal under NTIP, when a new teacher comes into the board, the first thing they would look at is whether or not they are actually in their first contract teaching position since being certified, or if all their prior experience was outside of Ontario. If that's the case, then they will be using the new teacher induction program evaluation process that I will go over in the next few slides. If they're new to your board, but they have prior teaching experience in Ontario, then they're going to follow the probation period appraisal process under the TPA process for experienced teachers. One of the main tools used under the new teacher induction program is a professional development tool called the NTIP strategy form. The purpose of this form is to identify and track professional goals for the teacher in their NTIP year. And it is designed under the three main induction elements that make up the NTIP program, that being orientation, professional development, and mentoring. At our board, we've created a sample form for new occasional teachers that they can look at when they're completing this form, just to give them an idea of how the form is completed. So for example, we show them an example where a goal may be to use the electronic report card program, and a strategy may be to attend a board workshop on using the electronic report card program scheduled in November. We encourage the new teacher to collaborate with their principal and their mentor in completing this form, because often these resources will be able to identify possible strategies that will help them achieve their professional development goals. As far as the actual appraisal process that happens under NTIP, it's very similar to the experienced teacher in that there are still a series of meetings that occur, but in NTIP, the new teacher would be doing 2 appraisals during a 12-month period. And the intent of this process is to celebrate new teacher strengths and to provide an opportunity to have professional dialogue or on 1 or 2 suggestions that would contribute to their growth and support them. It's made up of competency statements, the series of meetings, and is completed by a summative report that is specific to the NTIP program. The actual competency statements that are listed and evaluated under NTIP are narrowed down on the Ontario College Standards of Practice to 8, which were identified as most applicable to new teachers. 4 relate to commitment to students and student learning, 1 relates to professional knowledge, and 3 relate to professional practice. And if you actually look at the summative form, each of these is listed as an area under the form. The summative report form is the evaluation form that's completed at the end of the series of meetings, and it's intended to be a vehicle to reflect on feedback and to monitor growth. It would be provided to the new teacher shortly after the classroom visit, and we provide a copy to the new teacher when they're notified that they're going to be evaluated, so that they can see right from the beginning what they will be evaluated on. And we also post it on an information board that's available to new teachers as a resource, so they can access it at any time. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Colleen from Toronto Catholic to give a principal's perspective on the new teacher induction program.
Thank you, Paulette. Just like the LTO evaluation, you do need to know your timelines and the process. As was previously stated, in Toronto Catholic, we need to complete 2 evaluations within 12 months of the date of hire. The best thing that I did as an administrator in order to understand the TPA process was to sit down with a coordinator from HR whose portfolio included TPA. Although I had attended a general workshop, I found the one-to-one session, which only lasted about an hour and a half, was amazing. The coordinator came and sat with me and taught me many of the tips and tricks for completing it in a more efficient way. and it saved me a lot of time. It also helped me focus on what the purpose of the evaluation was. As a larger board, this is possible. In a smaller board, you may be able to sit down with a colleague who has experience, or even discuss it over the phone, who's with someone who has the experience and may be able to teach you some of the things that make the process a little more less daunting for you. I find I spend more time with NTIP teachers to help them understand the process, going over the different competencies and the different forms they need to complete, as they are often new to the process and/or the profession. With all teachers, especially NTIP teachers, I let them know that I will take notes during my observation so that I can use quotes of what they say and what the students say to include under my principal comments. They're always welcome to a copy if they want one. However, my chicken scratch is a challenge for most on a good day. One teacher involved in the NTIP process at the end told me he printed off his evaluation form and put it on his fridge because he felt the evaluation captured exactly what he did, and he felt that the process was worthwhile, not only for celebrating his successes, but it also enabled me to support his growth goals. Another question you may wish to consider and offer suggestions on Twitter at #CPCOTPA is, where can you go for support to understand how the TPA process works in your board? There is a Twitter question up that says, can a teacher decline to participate in the process? My understanding is no, that a teacher cannot decline to participate in the process. However, the best thing you can do is if a teacher does come to you and declines, saying they do not want to participate in the process, is that I would in contact with your HR department as well as your supervisory officer for advice as to how to proceed. Now I'll turn over to your Catholic, who may be able to add more to that perspective.
Yes, certainly, Colleen. With respect to that, I would also echo the fact of contacting human resources. There are situations where there may be exceptional circumstances going on in an individual's life that may be for compassionate reasons. It may be considered to be deferred for a year, but they certainly can't decline to participate entirely. But it would be worth having those conversations and understanding it and possibly looking at deferring it if there were exceptional circumstances in place. So at this point, I'm going to move into the last appraisal process in the career of a teacher, and that is the experienced teacher process. Under the experienced teacher process, there is also a professional development tool that I'm sure you're all familiar with called the Annual Learning Plan. This is very similar to the form that new teachers use, the individual NTIP strategy form, in that it's a tool to allow teachers to set professional development goals for themselves. I'll then go into a little bit about the actual appraisal process when a teacher is in an evaluation year. With respect to the annual learning plan, it is a vehicle to support experienced teachers' professional learning and growth throughout the life of their teaching career. And all experienced teachers must complete an annual learning plan each school year, including their appraisal year. And the plan, it helps administrators learn more about the aspirations, strengths, professional learning interests, and needs of the teacher. The key requirements of the annual learning plan is that it is a teacher authored and directed document, and it is a living document. So certainly it isn't something that necessarily gets set in September, October, and therefore cannot ever be changed. As the professional development goals of a teacher change and grow, the document certainly can be updated to reflect those new goals. In an appraisal year, the teacher would review and update the annual learning plan in a meeting with the principal as part of the appraisal process. In non-appraisal years, the meeting with the principal is option, but they still need to complete the form and complete it but no later than the end of October. Some resources that we suggest to our teachers in completion of the annual learning plan would be to look at a previous year's annual learning plan and maybe build on some of the professional development goals that the teacher has already started working on. Another resource could be the summative report of their last teacher performance appraisal. It could be through professional dialogue, a self-assessment of their areas of desired growth. It could be focused on a career stage or path, any professional interests or personal commitments, religious faith development goals that they may hold, as well as looking at the improvement goals of the school, board, and or ministry, and aligning their professional development goals with the goals that the board is also trying to achieve. With respect to the actual process itself, the appraisal cycle for experienced teachers is a 5-year cycle, and one appraisal is completed during their appraisal year. If there should be 4 years that elapse between appraisal years, and if there is a leave of absence period during that time, it would not be counted in that in the determination of that cycle. And at our board, Human Resources provides a TPA report to each school principal in September of each year, where we clearly indicate for principals who is in an evaluation year to help facilitate the notification process to get the appraisal process for that year underway. I'm now going to turn it back over to Colleen from Toronto Catholic to give a principal's perspective on the experienced TPA process. Colleen?
Thank you, Paulette. Just to talk about the ALP first, some things that I do to keep the annual learning plan a living document are, in my weekly updates to staff, I might make suggestions throughout the year, especially at the beginning of the year when they're completing their ALP, is to consider including goals or a goal from our urgent critical need, I believe it's called SIPSA in other boards, to keep that at the forefront, that they may want to include that in their annual learning plan. I invite all teachers to meet with me, even those that are not on appraisal that year, and this year quite a few did take me up on the offer because they wanted to share what their goals were and ask for feedback, and that way I can support them moving forward right at the beginning of the year. Not all do, but often quite a few will want to meet with you, and it's invitational only, of course. I also ensure that teachers know that the ALP is a living document and can be updated by them whenever they want, and some have throughout the year been updating it once they know that. Also, based on growth goals, you may wish to make a chart and or create a study group or team based on a particular focus. I often send articles, or if there's a workshop that I know ties into somebody's annual learning plan, I will send them the information. That way it keeps it alive and shows that I do value the process and that I'm supporting them in meeting their growth goals. There was a Twitter question on the feed about can you group them together, and I think in larger schools you can. I know that some principals of my colleagues have actually worked with a small group. One of the suggestions on the feed is that a welcome breakfast where everybody comes together, so it can be sort of a bit of a collaborative inquiry if there's common goals that teachers have. So there's different ways you can group them. I like to do it one-on-one with each teacher. I like to invest the time, but in larger schools that may be more difficult, especially in a secondary school. So absolutely, you could group LTOs together and experienced teachers, or depending on what the growth goals are, I think you could definitely do that. With the experienced teacher, the actual evaluation form, I asked for a pre-observation meeting to go over the process and the annual learning plan with the teacher. That gives us the time that we're not trying to do everything at the pre-observation meeting. I also, at that pre-observation, sorry for lack of a better word, is I let them know what will happen at the actual pre-observation meeting. I may resend them the initial email that I sent them at the beginning of the year about what to bring to the pre-observation meeting. And again, I emphasize focus is on celebrating their strengths and looking at next steps and growth. One thing I do between the pre-observation meeting and the observation meeting is I like to pre-populate into the application, which means all of the look-fors, I put them into the actual evaluation form. And I find that when I go back after the observation, it's very easy for me to click on the look-fors that apply, so I'm not spending a lot of time pulling and finding which ones I like. I put them all in and I just click on the ones that are relevant. And I find this really does save me a lot of time because I know one of my colleagues talk about how much time each one takes. So I try to do things that save time. At the pre-observation meeting, before it, I actually asked teachers to send me an electronic version of the lesson plan. That way I can cut and paste it into the application, which also saves me time, so I'm not trying to put in what the observation focus is going to be. I have it as the lesson plan. If we need to tweak it as we go through it, that's fine. The teacher may say, oh, I'd rather do this now, or based on conversation, so there's time for that, but I feel it saves a lot of time that I'm not retyping a lot of stuff in. I also let the teachers know at the pre-observation meeting that we will complete their strengths, goals, and strategies together at the post-observation meeting. So on that part of the actual evaluation form, I will say this part of the evaluation will be completed in collaboration with the teacher at the post-observation meeting. And I feel that really honors the process. It allows them to have ownership over their goals and makes the process more collaborative and meaningful. At the post-observation meeting, actually just before it, I often send an email as soon as I'm done, and I do try to get my principal's comments in as soon as possible, and ask them to review the comments before they come to see me. That way they get to do it privately and then can come with any questions and we can go from there. And then we have a dialogue about strengths, growth goals, and strategies. And I think that really honors the process, that they can really see that it's about us working together and me supporting them. And I often, when we're setting those growth goals, is I redirect them to their ALP as well as to our urgent critical need or the SIPSA. And I think that really does help put the focus on I'm supporting them with their goals, but also that if we can work on our school goals, that can also be part of the process. I feel the best part of TPA is that teachers have their voice, and it is a collaborative process. It's a great way to build relationship and understand your teacher's strengths, goals, and needs, which in turn supports student achievement, and as was mentioned earlier, it augments the learning environment. A question you may wish to consider and post a response to on Twitter at #CPCOTPA is, what strategies or tips do you have to share that help you save time completing the process, yet still make TPA meaningful to both you and the teacher? I'm just going to quickly check if there's any more questions on Twitter. So there's a couple of questions. Does a teacher have to align their TPA goals with the school or board goals? Absolutely, they don't have to. They own their TPA as well as their ALP. But often, in terms of resources and the amount of time that's spent on the urgent critical need or the SIPSA, it's really helpful if they choose to go that way, because that's where resources are being allocated. But absolutely, if they have other goals or choose to focus on something else, the teachers do own their own TPA. I'm going to turn it over to York Catholic now to add their perspective to that question.
That's absolutely correct. I did the same thing when I was at the school, and I did find that stressing the link to the SIPSA was very powerful, especially because I linked the SIPSA to our funding as well. So that was one way that teachers would engage with the SIPSA in a very meaningful and personal way, but it was not required. There is another question on Twitter that I'd like to address. It's a technical question. The question is asking about YouTube went blank, what should I do? And a reminder that if you are having any technical difficulties, we ask you to recopy the broadcast into your browser. In this part of the presentation, we're really moving beyond the technical aspects of doing the TPA, moving towards the possibilities. We ask a couple of very poignant questions. How can you augment the learning culture in the school by effectively engaging teachers in the performance appraisal process? The Ontario Leadership Development Branch has published much research based on 5 guiding principles, which we will discuss. And how do we say what we need to say? We review the competencies and samples in the TPA. Engaging teachers in conversations about teaching and learning is one of the most important roles that the administrator can have and the greatest impact on student outcomes. Learning-focused conversations should not be limited to an annual meeting about the teacher's annual learning plan or the pre- or post-observation meetings during an appraisal year, but rather they should occur regularly. a follow-up to the team or staff meeting, a presentation, or simply an informal conversation in the staff room. By regularly engaging with teachers in discussions about teaching and learning, you build credibility and a trusting relationship that effectively prepares you and the teacher for the learning-focused conversations through the performance appraisal process. You and the teacher are more likely to feel comfortable openly discussing his or her practice, goals, and growth-oriented feedback if the performance appraisal discussions are simply one of the many professional conversations between you both. Collaborating with teachers is a vital element to both the learning culture of the school and to the performance appraisal process as effective growth-oriented opportunities. Vivian Robinson states the role of the administrator must be more than just supporting or sponsoring staff in their learning. In promoting and participating in teacher learning and development, the administrator participates in the learning as a leader, a learner, or both. If the administrator is a true collaborator, he or she is more likely to be seen by staff as a source of instructional advice, which suggests that if they are both more accessible and more knowledgeable about the instructional matters. Here are a few ways to build collaboration with your staff. Involve all teachers in the development of the SIPSOP. Teachers will be more likely motivated to connect their own learning goals to something they have interest in creating. Build professional learning network among teachers with common learning goals. Foster these networks and connections during grade, division, department meetings, and PA days. Create opportunities throughout the year for teachers to discuss their learning goals and the progress of other division or department meetings. Coherence can be found in one of the overarching goals, to improve student achievement. There are many competing priorities in the school and board. A focus on teaching is essential to reach all of these priorities. It is therefore important that you align your work as it relates to these priorities with the ALP and the TPA. Ask questions to guide discussion and the pre-observation meeting that make explicit connections between the teacher's practice and the SIPSA and other school, board, or ministry initiatives. Through grade, division, or department meetings, PA day sessions model the use of the success criteria to highlight what the practice would look like in a classroom and connect to what you would be doing or looking for during formal classroom visits. During PA sessions or at grade, division, or department meetings, use reflective questions to engage teachers in discussions about teaching and learning. Use the same questions throughout the ALP and the TPA process to generate discussion on the teacher's practice and goals. The value you place on the ALP by meeting with the teacher to discuss goals and strategies, suggest resource, and offer support will heighten the value the teacher gives to the ALP process. You can further build value into the ALP and TPA process by aligning professional learning and resources with your staff's goal. For instance, you can analyze and collect the learning goals outlined in the ALPs into common themes which may guide the refinement of the SIPSA. Use these to connect formally or informally with teachers with common learning goals. Design differentiated staff learning based on themes of learning goals, and support learning goals by accessing school, board, and ministry resources. The performance appraisal is designed to engage in collaborative, growth-oriented discussions about teaching and learning. Embedded in the broadcast learning culture of the school, performance appraisal can profoundly motivate and stimulate teachers' growth and instructional improvement. It's both an opportunity to formally acknowledge what the teacher is doing well and to provide forward-looking feedback for support and growth. The annual learning plan and the performance appraisal should provide a strategy for teachers and administrators to jointly focus on instructional practices and ongoing professional learning. They provide opportunities to engage in professional dialogue about these priorities and the teacher's practice, to motivate further growth and direct or access support. It's important that the ALP and the TPA are situated within the learning culture of a school and not in isolation. In my experience, one of the most underutilized tools for conducting a meaningful TPA at our disposal is the annual learning plan. The purpose of the annual learning plan is to facilitate each teacher's continuous learning and development through the identification of their professional learning goals and strategies. The ALP can be used to open up conversations and engage and develop the teacher's instructional strategies. This could be accomplished by 1. Providing written acknowledgement of the teacher's ALP to validate and encourage the promotion of self-directed lifelong learning among staff. It also provides an excellent tool for connecting colleagues with similar goals or colleagues who can mentor each other. 2. The administrator using the ALP to create a school profile much in the same way that teachers do create a class profile, having the opportunity to look holistically and evaluate teachers' needs with the limited financial resource in the most effective manner. 3. The coherence that is created between the ALP, school improvement planning, and budgeting, creating meaningful opportunities for administrators to impact student achievement and well-being. We all have many rich exemplars that we can recall, and I've just shared one where the written acknowledgement was not only validate the teacher's goal, but demonstrates the commitment on the part of the administrator to support the teacher and align budgetary needs to facilitate the teacher's goal. We invite you to share your tips at #CPCO TPA, and at this time, Marianne and Paulette will highlight some of the conversations from Twitter.
One of the questions that's come forward is, what is the role of my SO in this process? And certainly, with respect to the actual evaluation process, one of the things that we always reiterate to principals is the importance that if somebody is struggling and you know that somebody is struggling, to not wait until the teacher performance appraisal process before any conversation starts to happen about those struggles. So certainly, where that is identified, a conversation with your school superintendent to talk about the possible concerns you may be having and what supports could be there is a very important thing to do prior to any TPA process that occurs.
One of the questions is, are there some additional resources that we can suggest? And this really leads well into our next slide. We chose two particular resources to highlight in our mentorship session. The first one was dealing with hard or crucial conversations. It's a well-known book and resource, and it is a good read to help prepare how to have those conversations. The second resource by Stephen Covey was interesting in that it paired the concept of having smart trust, and it paired that concept with an administrator that does not extend trust can actually hurt an organization. So those were two resources that we used in last year's mentorship session. This year's mentorship session, we're using the influencer because of the influence that the administrator has over the teachers and staff members at their school. But there is a wealth of resources, and I would suggest that you really make contact with your HR department and your supervisory officer to see if there are board resources as well. What strategies do you use to ensure that the TPA process in your school is collaborative, develops teachers, demonstrates that you are an instructional leader, is focused on student achievement and well-being? These are the key questions. As the hour has flown by, we ask you to keep the conversation going, sharing strategies and tips and asking questions. You might consider referring to the Principal Connections magazine. We encourage you also to visit the CPCO website and check out the resources in the e-learning tab under TPA. The workshop walks participants through 3 modules that cover the requirements, timelines, and responsibilities for appraisee and appraiser. And of course, check out the resources available through the Ministry of Education. On behalf of the web conference facilitators from York Catholic and Toronto Catholic District School Boards and CPCO, I would like to thank you for your participation in today's session. I would especially like to thank you for your contributions in sharing strategies and tips.
That's it.
So
we would still be quiet at that point, and then we'd have to turn the broadcast off. I thought that went really well. But,
yeah.
Like the flow was really, really good.
So we took
I just wondered if we
minutes.
could somehow build in a few more of the conversation.
Yeah, I think because the timing, this is the first time we've run right through it.
It's about 50 minutes.
Yeah, so we have a little bit of time.
A little bit of time to sort of tackle a couple of, Yeah, so we can, maybe if you just go in there now.
So we're...
Do you want me to do more than one question then? Because I was always worried about timing, which is why sometimes I speed up my speaking, so I'll speak even slower.
Yeah,
but...
we're still on live. We're still on, even though it's a practice, we're still on live broadcast, but that's okay. No, I thought the flow went really well. Jan was just throwing lots of great questions out there, so it depends on the nature, how many questions we're going to get, actually.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I can certainly invite a few colleagues I know to do that. But
and some of these questions are great.
Yeah,
and we could have a little bit more discussion about them. But I think we were all a little cautious.
Absolutely.
Time, yeah.
No, I understand that. And what I know that the way that the presenters did in the last webinar, what they did was sometimes they just commented on a comment.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't really a question, and just say, "Oh, that's a great comment from so and so." And then maybe you just add your perspective if you wanted, like a 10-second perspective. If I think during those breaks where you're actually responding to Twitter questions, maybe do 2 or 3.
Yeah.
You don't want to spend too long on your responses, but just enough to sort of capture the flow that's going.
Yeah. So I think
Brian. Brian. When the technical questions come up, is it better if I just are you watching for those questions that come up, or do you need?
I think what we're going to do for the technical questions is maybe what we should do is a couple times during the live broadcast is just a reminder.
Okay.
Okay.
So what would you like me to say? Because when it comes up, when I see that, because when I'm monitoring it for my section, I can say something. What would you like me to say? I'm going to put it in my notes so I don't get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're still in the live broadcast, but we're just a practice.
Colleen, what I'm thinking is that
what's that?
Maybe before you turn it over to Paulette, because there's 3 distinct breaks.
Yep.
That maybe before you turn it to Paulette, just a quick reminder.
Off. Okay, just a minute. We're going to escape from here for a second. We're just going to, go back to this. Oh, we're not in here. Oh, it's because we probably did it, yeah. Okay, hang on for a sec. Wonder why.
So if they're having a technical problem and they've lost...
Oh, it's not in here. Just a sec.
Well, if they're losing
oh, let's put you on the phone.
I'm wondering if you also tweet the answer.
If their webinar is from Twitter,
yeah.
So they can still send the tweet.
That's why I'm saying you should answer in Twitter, not on the presentation, because they've lost the presentation.
Right, so you may want to handle
through Twitter.
Yeah, both ways. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So what we could do is, I'm just going to stop the live broadcast here.